My next guest I've known for years, the official announcer of the Hartford Yard Goats, the UConn Huskies, and the Connecticut Sun. Conor Geary is very talented, and people are starting to notice him, and he might add a national job to his resume. And here he is, game day Conor Geary. Great to see you here.
Thank you, Dennis. Thank you for having me.
And congrats on your success. I'm really excited to sit down with you and talk about your career and your journey and what's next. But first, I know for our viewers' sake, just to prove that it's really you, give us like announce how you would introduce Dan Hurley.
And the head coach of your UConn Huskies in his 7th season, Dan Hurley.
I love it. That's
on
awesome.
the spot. Thank you.
That's awesome. And you do that like every day at UConn games and at Yard Goat games and the whole bit.
Yes, sir.
So tell me, how'd you first get interested? How'd you first get started?
Well, my story, I think, kind of probably goes back to my early childhood. I was introduced to a local community theater based out of Manchester called CAST, which stands for the Children's Associated Summer Theater. And I was, I think, eight years old at the time when I did my first production, and very early on got comfortable kind of in my own skin and performing and singing and dancing and memorizing lines. And I was part of that organization for about 10 years. I did some acting in college, was always kind of active in, local choir and kids choir at church and things like that. So there was always this performance element, but I decided pretty definitively that I was not going to go into professional performance. I had a lot of friends that I thought were far more talented than I was in song and dance, and I was not going to move to New York or LA and go from audition to audition. Fast forward a little bit, I got into the restaurant industry for a number of years in Hartford, and one of the places that I worked for had a comedy club in their basement, City Steam Brewery.
Yes, yes.
And I was there for a number of years, and I managed the comedy club, and so every weekend I was introducing comedians and doing crowd work and introducing shows, and really enjoyed that. That kind of, scratched that performance itch for a while. But ultimately, I transitioned and began working for the Hartford Yard Goats full time. I had no idea that I was sort of on the cusp of this new opportunity. And in the early part of 2018, the woman at the time who was doing the Yard Goats on-field hosting moved out of the state. And so they were holding auditions for a new on-field host. And I threw my hat in the ring thinking, I was already there working, but this would be a cool thing to do. And there was some initial reluctance to kind of give me a second role. But ultimately, after the audition, I sort of twisted my boss's arms and got the gig. So it started with the Yard Goats first in the spring of 2018 for my first sports announcing gig. And later on that year, the University of Connecticut, UConn baseball, played a game at the ballpark in Hartford. And I was asked to sort of host the game for UConn, and that was how I met UConn Athletics. And after that one game, they asked me if I'd be willing to do some more for them, and the rest is sort of history, although I'm sure we'll talk more about it.
You are amazing, though.
Thank you.
When you were a little kid, did you realize you had a great voice?
I think my parents, my mom would tell you I had a great voice. I thought I had a good voice, but I didn't think I had a memorable voice.
Sure.
I still to this day don't love listening to I know nobody likes their own voice. I still don't love listening to myself, but in an arena and on a microphone where I can sort of, let it rip, yeah, I think I've gotten a lot of feedback that it's memorable, it's impactful, kind of changes the mood of the venue.
Lately, your career has gone just this upward trajectory, and you were selected to announce some games during the NCAA tournament, March Madness. Tell me about that.
Yeah, so I've been fortunate to kind of get tied in with some of the folks who do championships for the NCAA. I started with the lacrosse national championship weekend, which always takes place on Memorial Day. And a few years ago, it was being held at Rentschler Field in East Hartford. And connections kind of aligned, and somebody reached out and said, would you be interested in doing this? Of course. And I was familiar with the venue itself, with Rentschler, because of UConn football. So it seemed a natural fit, and I was fortunate to be asked to return for the last 2 years. They were held at Lincoln Financial Field, where the Philadelphia Eagles play down in Philly. And then I got asked to do the FCS National Championship football game, which is in Frisco, Texas. So I did that this past January. And while I was there, I sort of made a tongue-in-cheek comment that, you know, if you want to have me out for the Final Four or something, you know, I'll make myself available. And they kind of responded and said, well, thank you very much, but, you know, you work for a basketball team that's doing very well right now, so we're probably going to pass. And shortly after I got home from that trip to Frisco, I got a message that said, you know, I think I might have an opportunity for you. It wouldn't be the Final Four, but it would be the regional. So the Sweet 16 and the Elite Eight. The condition was that I would have to travel to a non-home venue.
That's fair enough.
Which was fair enough. They, you know, they were very conscious and considerate of the fact that I do have a strong relationship with the University of Connecticut, obviously. And so I said, that's great. So they invited me out to Los Angeles, and I hosted the Sweet 16 games and the Elite Eight match at Crypto.com Arena.
Yeah, and the reviews were pretty good. Everyone said you did an amazing job, and as a result, you're sort of getting a buzz in the industry. People kind of know your name now, and you were recently approached, you were saying, by an NFL team. Tell me as much as you can. I know there is some confidentiality there, but
no, not at all, not at all. That sort of came out of nowhere. That materialized in a matter of just a couple of weeks, where a colleague of mine at the Connecticut Sun kind of sent me a posting that was put on LinkedIn, and it was for an in-stadium host for an NFL team. And you know, I have, part of how I have to kind of slice my schedule is by the sports season. So with UConn football being on Saturdays, I've sort of felt for the last maybe 2 years or so that the only additional sport I might be able to take on might be an NFL team on Sundays. And so this opportunity came up, and so I traveled and auditioned live and in person with 9 other candidates from all over the country, and had a wonderful experience in a 75,000 seat NFL stadium.
Wow.
And was actually very optimistic coming out of the audition that the opportunity would present itself. And again, this one just had some logistical difficulties, I'll say, because it would require a fair amount of travel and airfare. And, you know, my wife and I are expecting our second daughter in October, so I had some personal considerations.
Sure. Well, congrats on that.
Thank you. But it went very well, and as I sort of said in my post, it left me feeling like the next thing could be just around the corner.
And what would the ideal next thing be?
I think it would be an NFL team, preferably one that I don't have to fly 10 hours there and back to get to.
It's only a Sunday, you know, it's once a week.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, in theory, you know, depending on how, not every team has the same game day fan experience structured, right? So not every team necessarily has my role built into it. But if I could find that team that is looking to enhance the fan experience and, you know, needs somebody to come yell into the microphone and get everybody riled up, and I can get there, I think that would be the next best thing. You know, I love the state of Connecticut. You know,
it's a great place to be.
It's a great
I mean, let's be honest, right?
We plan to make our home here for a long time. This is not the sort of role where I would, you know, people ask me and say, are you going to go to the big leagues or something like that? This really isn't the sort of job that would support kind of upheaving and moving out somewhere else just to work a season for a sports team. I kind of have to patch a few different teams together to make it make sense.
So if you were, let's say, hired by the Kansas City Chiefs, you would just go to Kansas City once a week for the games. Well, there's only 8 games, right?
Yeah, I mean,
all the home games.
You know, maybe 1 or 2 preseason, 8 home games, and maybe some playoffs. So it's a small number of days on the calendar, even though it's got a big sports impact in the sports world with the football season. But yeah, something like that would be ideal.
What motivates you every day, like, to prepare for your job? Obviously, you do your homework, you read the rosters, you read the names you have to read, but just before the game starts, what do you do to get yourself psyched?
So I think it's my responsibility to ensure that the fans have a better time, in part because I'm there doing kind of my thing than if I wasn't. So, and I've been a sports fan my whole life. I've gone to many, many, many games long before I was doing sort of the in-game hosting and announcing role. I think what motivates me is, you know, the interactions that I have with families and kids or people who come out for the first time is to really ensure that they have a memorable experience, they're getting value for their sports dollar, their entertainment value, and I kind of want to leave people with a little bit of a wow factor, you know, so that interaction, that engagement is what motivates me to do it. It's not the world's easiest job. It's a lot of fun, but there's a lot of work that goes into it. There are intricacies, and again, it's a very public job. So like you talked about, you don't want to slip up. You don't want to mess up because everybody in the stands notices if you do.
Well, we're all super proud of you, Conor, and I'm blessed to call you a friend and blessed to have worked with you on some events. In fact, we have one coming up later this year with Coach Hurley and Catholic Charities and the Archbishop. And so maybe we'll swap roles for just a moment, and I'll get to say Coach Dan Hurley, but I can't do it as well.
Well, I got to save my voice a little. You can take it. I believe in you.
Conor Geary, best of luck.
Dennis, thank you.
And, keep making us proud.
I will.
Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
We'd love to hear from you. We'll be right back.